Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to friends joining from different time zones. My name is Zeenath Reza Khan from the University of Wollongong in Dubai and the Center for Academic Integrity in the UAE. I have the immense pleasure today to welcome you to the first Academic Integrity Conversations podcast series, a joint collaboration between UOWD and the Center. The purpose of the series is to bring you intimate conversations with key stakeholders in academia on topics of academic and research integrity from around the world. Today, I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, mentor, and friend, Professor Anne Rogerson, Associate Dean of Faculty of Business, Chair of the Academic Integrity Advisory Group at University of Wollongong. Professor Anne is a passionate educator, keen to engage students in developing lifelong learning skills while connecting their learning experiences to theory and real-world contexts and their future workplaces. Her commitment extends way beyond business education to the increasingly prominent area of promoting academic integrity. She actively advocates and shares how assessment design can limit academic misconduct and facilitates the easier detection of contract cheating situations, which has led to local, national, and international recognition. Welcome, Professor Anne, to the conversation.
Thanks, Zeenath.
Thank you. Both Professor Anne and I are delighted to welcome a very special guest as our very first invited speaker on the podcast, the Vice Chancellor and President of the University of Wollongong, Australia, Professor Patricia Davidson. Professor Patricia joined the University of Wollongong as Vice Chancellor in May of 2021. Prior to her current role, she was Dean of the Johns Hopkins School of Nursing in Baltimore in the US. In 2021, she was the recipient of the Consortium Universities for Global Health Distinguished Leader Award. This honor celebrates her exceptional contributions to the advancement of global health worldwide. An absolute people's leader, we are honored to welcome you, Professor Patricia, to the podcast today.
Thank you.
The theme of this session has been chosen to reflect the kind of conversations, concerns, and practices that we have all seen and heard and experienced in the last 24 months. The new era is upon us. We are still a bit uncertain, but we are heading back to our classrooms after our students have been online for almost better part of the 2 years due to the global pandemic and emergency distance learning in most regions of the world. I will begin with you, Professor Anne. We have had research publications trickling in since 2020, highlighting concerns of non-compliance with academic integrity values. We know from news reports and such of the cases of online test cheating in some American universities, studies that have shown exponential increase in students accessing third-party providing services in UK, military universities reporting online tests, and so much more. You have done immeasurable amount of work in your classrooms with your assessment designs, and so much well before COVID-19 hit us in 2020. Would you share with us some key issues and trends that seem to have emerged due to the online learning? And is it really that different from what it was before?
Thanks, Zeenath, and hello to everyone. One of the key issues that I've noticed that's come out over the course of the pandemic, and it's a result of the shift to online learning and using technology for education rather than having our class or a lot of class-based activities, is the increased reliance on internet searching for information. And part of that, or part of the problem with that is people online shopping are used to ranking sites and algorithms that promote certain sites. And unfortunately, the sites selling cheating materials or sharing materials are using those same algorithms to promote their services. And where I think there is a disconnect and an area we need to focus on in education is actually teaching people how to discern what is quality on the internet versus what is just someone's paid to promote their site. Because the sites selling materials or hosting sharing materials are there for profit, they are investing some of that profit in promoting their sites. So it's very quick for a student to do a search and find something, but it mightn't necessarily be the rhetoric and the advertising spend might be masking something a bit more sinister. As to things being the same or different, one of the things I promoted to the academics in our faculty was that some assessments didn't actually change. If we had essays or report assignments that were uploaded to a learning management system, those actually didn't change. The biggest changes were in exam-based assessments. and taking them out of a hall where people were reasonably certain that the person attending the exam was who they were on their student card. What's different and on the exam thing is how we go about invigilation, and online invigilation of examinations was a very new field. Some institutions were using it, but the shift to online learning has necessitated an increase of online invigilation, and that trend's going to continue. So the other one is around technical issues, that we make an assumption that everybody has the same level of access to technology and reliable internet, and that's not the case. And we do, as educators, need to make allowances for that, but there are some who also may take advantage of that for less than responsible means.
Absolutely. And you're so dead on about the issues. And in fact, a recent study that was conducted in the UAE showed a shocking increase in the number of these unique and organic websites that just popped up, whether in the country or outside, that were targeting higher education students and trying to sell essays and reports and presentations. Some were even offering to attend classes on behalf of students. You don't have to, you have so much to worry about with COVID, let us do everything else for you. So this kind of advertising, I think, was very prolific. And I think they really positioned themselves well in targeting students. In fact, I think in Australia, there was a study that showed students may actually be contract cheating more than that was previously reported, because they found an algorithm that can actually check that other than just the self-reporting. Thank you so much for that insight, Professor Anne. So moving to you, Professor Patricia, we would like to hear from you now. So with your numerous academic leadership roles prior to coming to UW, from Johns Hopkins to Curtin University to University of Technology, Sydney, and more, what are your thoughts on some of the enablers of these kinds of behavior that Professor Anne has just described?
Well, firstly, thanks so much. And I think both you and Anne have given a really good description of the current scenario and, the bad actors who are out there ready to really take advantage of vulnerable people. Often, and I'll reflect on my experiences largely leading professional schools where cheating is not just a violation, but a kind of marker for professional integrity. And many of our schools that we have at Wollongong, from law, but engineering, if you can't build a bridge, we don't want it to come down. So many of the courses that we run where we're developing professionals from law, medicine, range of health disciplines, it's really important. So I've often, when I reflect on student issues that I've had to deal with, I think there's a spectrum. I think we've kind of overdone plagiarism. It's not a mortal sin. Sometimes it's just, I don't know how to do it. So, and some people really overreact like it is a mortal sin, through to really understanding what are the behaviours that drive students to cheat. And it's often fear. We know, people that make mistakes, it's often due to fatigue and other things. So I would also like us to think about what drives students to cheat. In an ideal world where we focus on what are the knowledge, skills, and competencies our students have, it would be great to sort of move to a mastery learning approach in many areas where people don't fear examinations. And so I think that's the student side. And often, as in many other areas, it's the most vulnerable who have the least resources and resilience that are preyed upon. But also as teachers, I think we've got to be innovative in our assessments. We've kind of pretty much, many of the assessment items, or not necessarily the items, but the breakdown are no different to when I was a student 40 years ago, 50% exam, 25% this. So I think there's huge opportunities for us to be much more innovative in our pedagogy. I've seen some really great examples, students submitting videos where they're actually presenting orally. And, personally, and again, this is my own bias as Patricia Davidson, not the Vice Chancellor, I think there's a huge amount of undue effort put on exams. And I even reflect myself, like I can't tell you how many statistics exams I crammed, but it was only when I really had my own data set and had to do the analysis myself that I really understood it. So I think we need to think about, what are the administrative barriers and facilitators, what are the needs of students, and also how we can support each other as colleagues and as teachers to make sure that we achieve the objectives we need to.
Thank you so much. And you're absolutely right. In fact, we've also seen, like in different parts of the world, how parental role and how parents perceive integrity has such a huge role in children's upbringing and their understanding of these integrity values as well. Staying with you, Professor Patricia, as Vice Chancellor now and President of one of the leading universities in Australia, how would you describe the kind of response you have seen the university put in place, keeping academic integrity in mind?
Well, I've seen, the initiatives of many of people like yourselves and Anne and our Associate Deans Education, who are really trying to achieve student-centric approaches to maximise educational development while also maintaining academic integrity. So I think the means have been really innovative. I think online proctoring is just another form of invigilation, of walking up and down halls in exam rooms, which is not exactly correct. And I just think we can be a lot more innovative, as we've seen through many of your activities, in helping students to be life ready. And I think that's so important. And, I'd often say to students who had issues that I taught, had to, review for issues. I say, you walk into a workplace and no one's going to look at you and say your grade point average was 2.8, but they're going to know if you're a cheat. And look, it is such a small world that we live in. And we experienced that just at UOWD Dubai. Like last night, I went to dinner with someone from Australia I'd worked with 20 years ago and someone who's working in Dubai I'd worked with in the US. So your reputation your reputation and integrity as students move into adult life and the workplace is everything. And it's also your integrity or lack of integrity that will bring you down in many professional roles, in public life, as well as industry. So I think it also gives an opportunity for us as teachers to really work more closely with students to really help them develop the skills for life, not just the skills, to pass, English 101. I just think it's from this real disruption from very bad actors are some opportunities for also pedagogical innovation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that insight. And you're right. I think the onus is not just on the students, but on us as well in terms of innovation and thinking outside the box and how we can actually get students to be honest and be fair and be respectful and not just run after the grades and the marks, because at the end of the day, and this was one of the things that we kept saying at UOWD to students, that remember, these subjects are not going to be repeated. Once you're done and you're back on campus, you will be expected to know this content. You'll be expected to understand what we are teaching you so you can apply it to the subjects that these are prerequisites too. So developing that kind of understanding for sure, I think, has also helped. Over to you, Professor Anne. So in the UAE at UOWD, after successfully hosting and organizing the European Network for Academic Integrity's International Conference in 2020, among a number of efforts that included setting up the university-wide COVID-19 response teams, blended learning and academic committees, we also collaborated with other institutions and launched the center that is now hosted at UOWD. Coming back to you and your experiences, what are the good practices that faculties have adopted, engaged in, innovated to uphold integrity globally? And are they vastly different from what we have done at UOW and UOWD?
As far as vastly different, and I know with Zeenath and I and the connections we have through the various networks, we're speaking to a group of people who are very passionate about the space and probably have a broader base of knowledge in the academic integrity space than the wider higher education community. And one of the things I've noticed in Australia is the intelligence sharing between institutions, and also supported by our regulatory body in Australia, have been promoted. So when people are noticing a pattern or trend, they're making sure that there is an awareness across the sector. It's not about, well, I'm going to protect my institution and not protect anybody else. They're looking at it as a sector-wide problem so that there is support and there are a lot of eyes looking at these issues. And one of those that came to light actually through the US was the fact that there are now companies selling services saying they'll grade their work for you. So instead, as an academic, if you're short on time, outsource my work for grading and someone else will grade it for you. But that goes beyond even just the integrity issues of employment. It means institutional breaches of passwords and logins, because people are not only masquerading as someone else, they're masquerading as a representative of the university. And that's a big concern. So when that came out of the US and that came through Canada to me, then I distributed on our network to make everybody aware. And we then in turn make our various schools and faculty aware. So I think that communication thing and that community is probably stronger in Australia. There is a bit more resistance overseas in some quarters to actually acknowledging that issues such as contract cheating exist, and they're across the sector. People think if they're not reporting academic misconduct, then it doesn't exist. It's a bit of an ostrich head in the sand type attitude. And through the research, some of the one you mentioned before from Guy Curtis, it's now estimated it's close to 10%. Now that's a spectrum from transitional, not understanding institutional policy, through to blatant attempts to actually purchase work and pass it off as your own. So I think one of the things I've been focusing on in our faculty and across the institution, and now starting to reach out to the sector, is understanding disciplinary norms. The key to it is we don't all teach the same content, we don't all have the same material, we don't all have the expectations. But as educators, we know what we expect to see. And understanding those norms mean you can understand when stuff falls outside those norms. And they're the things where you need to have conversations with colleagues and with students to understand why that looks the way it is, because it's those conversations that we can help change attitudes, but then we can also feed it back into assessment. We mightn't have clarified an instruction correctly. We might have left a question too broad and not put a context on it. So it's about continuous conversations, cycles of improvement, but talking about it and recognising the issue is absolutely critical. And I think that's probably a little bit further ahead in Australia than other quarters, but it's nice to see the rest of the world is taking it seriously.
And isn't it so interesting what you said? In fact, I do remember through the triage clinics we run in the center, I had a school student once come and say, you know, but this was open book exam. And yet now I'm being told I cheated. But how can I cheat if it was open book and I read from the book? Of course, I'm allowed to, right? Isn't that what open book means? So there obviously was a very, it was a good case of exactly what you said of the lack of proper instructions coming through.
Well, the other thing that we picked up, and I think it was, I'm not sure if it was the first Senate that Trish came to, but we actually had a really interesting discussion as to around open book and take-home exams, because everything was at home. It was no longer a take-home assessment. It actually was at home. And so we actually had to change some wording and instructions around that to adapt to that particular change.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Just carrying on from that, Professor Patricia, so I think the last few years really have propelled Australia generally into the global forefront in terms of research, governance, practices. In fact, even the law that has come in to ban SA meal services, and the win they had in the last year alone on against one such service. So how do you see this position, the universities and the degrees we offer, particularly to international students?
Well, thanks for that question. I think one thing is about Australia is that firstly, there's a smaller number of universities and the majority are public, and even the private ones as well, which are 2 or 3, really come under the same regulator. And so there's a lot of homogeneity between Australian universities, which is very different to, say, in other parts of the world, particularly the US, or in particular, where you might, if you go to a business school, there's probably, 1,200 business schools of great variation in quality. So I think we're fortunate in Australia. The other things is the regulators that sometimes drive us crazy, keep us all on track and on target. And so we do have robust standards. So I think that is really important. And there is, particularly through the professional groups, strong communication. So, I think that puts us in a good place, but does not make us immune. And I think also within the broader societal dialogue, where often there is stretches of the truth and other things, I think sometimes it can really challenge people to exactly what you say, Zeenath, work out what are norms, what's okay, and also, maybe what I can get away with, which is always a dangerous place to be.
Absolutely. And I think even Anne mentioned this, that having those conversations and raising those awarenesses is so important. Moving on from this, Professor Anne, do you think the good practices we have just discussed, and there have been quite a few, from assessment, redesign, rethinking how we are talking to students, making students aware of what is right and what is wrong, where to draw the line, what are the support systems that are available, etc. Do you think these good practices are going to help now that our students are actually returning back to classrooms? Or do you think we'll find ourselves in a whole new world now that they've been out of class for 2 years?
I think there is a bit of a new world where people are, those seeking to profit from cheating, and I'm talking about the companies selling things or hosting sharing sites, will continue to try and exploit ways of making more money, because that's basically why they're in it. They might advertise on their site that they're there to help you and they care about students, but at the end of the day, it's all about money. So they are looking for different ways to earn money. And one of the ways is ghosting students, so being online and doing the exam for you. But I was aware of a case from the US that came up last week, where someone had then employed someone to take the online job interview for them. So it's extending beyond the classroom, and those something that Trish said in the beginning is how it translates into workplaces. It's not just about the study, it's about what it means beyond the degree. So if someone's used to employing someone to ghost them to do an assignment, they can go and ghost someone to do a job interview. But this particular person was found out when there were 2 different images. So the person who was in the interview was not the person who actually turned up to the workplace. And when they asked that person a question, it was an IT company, the person couldn't answer. And this is what students don't understand. It's not just about getting through an assignment. It's about the knowledge and being able to draw on that. That's what you're actually paying for. So if you're paying for a degree and paying for a subject, or your family's investing in it for you, to make the most of that wonderful educational opportunity. Because when you go to a workplace and get asked a question, it becomes very clear whether you know the information or not. I said to a group of senior people in Australian universities, and someone said, well, if someone cheated on one assignment, surely that's okay. And I'm going, if it was a medical student and that was the assignment about a disease that I have and they didn't know about it, I'd be really, really worried. I'm not prepared to take that chance. So that's why promoting to people about integrity is so important. So there is a new world. People will always be trying to find ways to exploit, But if you look back on stuff on plagiarism, it's not a new task. It's been going around for a very, very long time. So I see it as evolving rather than just a brave new world.
Yeah, wow. Yes, exactly. And one of my classic examples is the bridge. You know, we've heard of so many scary bridge collapses that happened, buildings that have collapsed in the recent years, and you don't assume to hear these things, but they're happening even in the developed world. And I will go back and tell my students the same thing. Would you want to be one of those buildings or one of those bridges if the engineer cheated their way out of through a degree? And I think one of the most horrific examples of this was the plane crash that happened, the PIA plane crash that happened in 2020, and 90 people died. And they only did investigation to find out the people had never sat for their own exams. Somebody else had sat for it. So you're right. I think it's the same culprits, but just evolving into something new or different. Moving on to you, Professor Patricia, your first few months into the role with UOW, your advocacy and the work has made it evident, as reported in the stand, that equity, diversity, social justice provides the foundation of your approach, as it is ensuring that staff and students feel connected to the university's greater mission. So now both UOW and UOWD have positioned themselves in their respective countries, Australia and UAE, as leading in this dialogue on academic integrity through research, governance, outreach, and everything else that we have discussed today. So my last question to you would be, how do you see academic integrity's positioning in this larger conversation around equity, diversity, social justice, and making students and staff feel connected?
Well, thanks for that question. And as you were asking it, I reflected back to my early days when I was a student at Wollongong, before many people on this call were born, but in the late 70s. And I'd had an experience where I'd been to ANU and dropped out because it was hard. But what I found was the faculty at Wollongong were really kind and helpful and understanding. And in a way, those role models helped me develop and grow as a teacher. So I just sort of wanted to make some remarks around the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion across all areas of our business, but it really impacts on academic integrity. And part of this is from the literature and part of this is from my experience. There is always going to be a small percentage of the population that are just bad actors and they're probably the ones we're not catching, to be really honest. Well, they do get caught, but it might take several decades they'll get caught. But I think a lot of students are under extreme stress and pressure. And in my conversations where I've had to deal with students who have cheated, if you often talk to them, it's because of this stress, pressure that has led them to making bad decisions. And often it's, people who are really tired. We know if, say, in nursing, if you work more than 10 hours a week, doesn't matter where you're working, you can be working in a nursing home, it's going to affect your grades. So, it's often kids or people with less means that are, sometimes working full-time jobs, running a family. So I think understanding people's situation is really important. The other thing is, building on your and Anne's comments, is the sophistication of the search engine optimization. Just the same as the for-profit universities are targeting people without the means to pay the fees, it's exactly the same. It's just why I go online and people, that St. John black dress that I looked at 2 years ago still keeps coming up in my feed because I still want it. So I think it's being aware of that. And then the other thing is, I'm a great believer of compassion and learning and lessons. And in fact, something that I feel really good about, there was a student who was due to be kind of marched out the door. And, I said no, I think if you admit it, and he went on a program. And every time I see him on Facebook soaring professionally and personally, I think, I made a difference because I was compassionate, and people do make mistakes. So, and a lot of it is sometimes bad decisions because of life circumstance or make mistakes. So, things I would do would, get people to have to write reflective essays, to have ethics consultations. And I think particularly in some professions, it is really important. And I've seen Susie's just come on this call now. It scares me when I see the increase of cheating in nursing, because I think, does that mean they will make up an observation? They'll say they've done something if they haven't. So I think the other great thing that you are doing is having the conversation. And that's part of it. And we can't expect everyone's lives to be perfect. The fact, Anne, that people are drowning in grading and they would think to pay someone, I think that is really sad. How are we not reaching out to our colleagues to say, look, I'm drowning, I need help. So I just think this is a really important conversation. And then the other thing that I just think that it's just really important within a global context, and I have seen it sadly in some of the global contexts I've worked, is this extreme parental pressure that has, in a way, cheating is one thing, but it has also led in some instances for students to take their own lives. So I think we've got to also be aware that particularly a lot of people are under a lot of parental pressure. And so understanding cultural norms, practices, and expectations, it is a really important part as well. And, what are the implications of the messages that we give? And I think part of that is, as a university and as institutions, where we focus on the value of people, not just for, their achievements, because we all achieve in lots of different ways. So I'm sorry that's a long answer, Zeenath, but I think you can't look at academic integrity as cheat, not cheat, like as a binary. It's always a conversation. And if you can recalibrate their focus, if you can give them confidence to say, I'm struggling, I don't know, I need help, I think as a teacher, that is just such a huge achievement.
Absolutely. And I'm so happy you took the time to explain all of that, because I think this was very crucial to the discussion and the conversations that we had today. It's about that compassion. It's about the triage that we do with our students, even after they have faltered, just letting them know that, yes, you have, but we are here to catch you and to help you come back and then, continue with your learning journey. So we are almost out of time. So at this stage, I would probably request Professor Patricia for any last advice or thoughts that you have for our audience.
No, it's fabulous. And I've had such a good time. I'm coming back tonight, but it's been fabulous to be at UOWD and to see the amazing work. There's something about the size of UOWD that really will allow you to do amazing work. Professor Currow, who was with me yesterday, he's with the staff awards. He said, I've never been to, any sort of staff awards where, where it was so impactful, the sense of community. So I think you've got a huge opportunity to do just great work. And also I love the fact that you're actually advancing the science of academic integrity through the scholarly approach that you're taking with a cultural lens. And I just think that's critically important. So thank you for all you do. Please, I think particularly at the moment, we need to be compassionate with our students and ourselves and our colleagues. And I think everybody deserves, a second chance, but or even, maybe not more than third, but just definitely a second chance. And also, the other thing that I think is important are the conversations and role models that are going to promote the norms and values of the professions and disciplines that we want people to go into. I just think that's critically important. And sometimes it's okay too for our colleagues and our students to see us falter, because we are all normal, and we all have good days and bad days. And I think, reaching out to each other for help is a real sign and a real role model that, we could get things done. And when you talked about the marking, I can remember marking, well, it's hard now with LMS, but we would just have pizza and wine and all sit in a room and just get through it. So I just think as we come out of this pandemic, we've learned a lot of lessons, and there are also some opportunities for reform and innovation. So I'm just delighted and proud to see you seizing them.
Thank you so much. Professor Anne, your last thoughts or advice?
Thanks. Well, I hope they segue into Trish's. It's probably my biggest thing is the principles of integrity are not just an educational thing, they're a life thing, they're a life skill. And some of our students don't have perhaps the right skills embedded in either in high school or other social contexts where maybe a parent's even done their homework for them and they've learned that it's okay for someone else to do their work and get the credit. So there's all these different narratives and things going on. But the important is that our students know that they can ask for help from us and not have to search on the internet for help, which leads them down the slippery slope of ending up in a site where they don't really want to be. But also, as Trish was saying, is asking each other and being vulnerable enough to say, actually, I don't understand this. What do you think? Those conversations are rich opportunities for learning for both students and for teachers. But also down to asking for help with conversations with students. I think even an academic having one of those perhaps challenging conversations with a student can be a bit confronting the first time. But I find if people reach out and then say, well, how do I do this? And I'm saying, look, I'll sit with you and we can work through it so that they can start to this modelling, learning how to do it, that it's not a confrontation, it's an exploration to understand why something happened. Because when we understand why it happened, then we can unpack it and put mechanisms in place to get the student back on track, to get assessments back on track and get learning back on track. And that's what it's all about at the end of the day.
Absolutely. I love that. It's not an investigation, it's an exploration. I'm going to use that somewhere. With that, we come to the end of our first Academic Integrity Conversation podcast. We hope our audience has gained insights into academic integrity and why it is so important, particularly in today's world. I take this opportunity once again to thank Professor Patricia Davidson and Professor Anne Rogerson for joining me, Zeenath Reza Khan, in this conversation today. Thank you so much, everyone.